But Ariel is in Israel. It's in Samaria. Judea and Samaria are an integral part of the state of Israel. They belong to the Jewish people and to no others. And I shall explain today why I say that. Even though the whole world think that the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, does not belong to the Jewish people, it belongs to the Arabs. How wrong they are, and how we are not expressing the truth to the world as we should do. Sometimes I like to come when I speak, I'd like to speak about the great achievements of Israel in every aspect, whether it's in military, whether it is in medicine, in agriculture, in high-tech, in Nobel Prize laureates. We have the most sophisticated missile system in the world, And we are such a tiny little state that to compare it with the United States, it's the area between Los Angeles and San Francisco in length, not in width. The width of Israel, the widest area is at the Negev. It's 40 kilometers, which is less than 30 miles from one end to the other. And in the West Bank, if we take the green line, it's only 9 kilometers, which is 5 miles to the shore. You can cut the whole country into two. But I want to speak about the dangers that the Jewish people are confronting today. It was only 10 years ago when I was in France and I was speaking at a meeting, and in the conversation it always comes up, now why don't you go to Israel? And they said, why should we go to Israel? It's very nice here. We have our jobs, we have our families here, and we see our future in France. Only 10 years later, many French Jews are buying many houses in Israel. They want to immigrate. France is no longer a place they can live in. So in spite of everything, Israel seems to be the best place to live in, the most secure place to live in. Because every time there is persecution here or other places. And I'm talking about Western countries. People are beaten up in Australia, in Canada, stabbed. And actually we are in a situation very similar to 1938. You know, the Holocaust would not have happened, or it would not have happened in that magnitude, if the Jews were not delegitimized in the 30s. It would not have happened. You know that British and American bombers were flying over Auschwitz, and they did not bomb Auschwitz. They did not stop the massacre and the extermination of the Jewish people, because the Jews were not counted. The Arabs are doing the same today. It's the same system. I think the Nazis could have learned something from the Arabs. Within 20 years since the Oslo Agreement, the Arabs have managed to put Israel in a very deep corner, and Israel is looked as if it's a disease. If you ask children in schools, if you ask people on the street, in Scandinavia, in other places. Which is the most dangerous country on earth? They would say Israel. Not Iran, not North Korea. Now I want to show you a clip, and I really apologize for the delay, but I thought that this clip is very important. And therefore maybe it was worth waiting, because I want to ask you a few questions after that clip. So bear with me a minute. Masses of people, you can see that there were many of them. They invaded a supermarket in Paris with cameras and television. And they went in and they started taking Israeli products and said, you see this product? This is made by the Jews on stolen Palestinian land. This is done, and then they put it into the basket and they put it and take it away. Now, this is a way to discredit Israel in the eyes of the public. Like, very similar to the Germans. We take the Jews aside. We show that the Jews are different. So you can see that what they have done now, you see they're all gathered, and now they are speaking about Palestine, about the Jews throwing the Arabs out of Palestine, using their land and confiscating their land and products, and therefore we should boycott Israel, because Israel is illegal in that area. Also, the technique is that there is no violence. Did you see that? There is no violence. You see, the police cannot interfere, nobody's doing anything, and nobody's interfering. The French are doing nothing. And perhaps all the manager of this place just stood aside and did not interfere because he didn't want to clash with them. So they brought this to the eyes of many television programs that showed this. And they are not appearing as hooligans, but they are appearing as people who are defending their rights. Because Israel in Judea and Samaria is illegal, and the settlements are illegal. And Israel took those areas from the Arabs that belong to the Arabs. They are Arab-Palestinian land. Now, did you see anyone, any leader, any Jewish leader in France, in the United States, or in Israel, who did anything about it? No. Nothing. Now let me show you the other side of the equation. We have an international conference in the Center for Law and Mass Media in Ariel, once a year. And we send invitations to all the ambassadors in Israel. Nobody comes. Last year, there was a great achievement. The ambassador of the Philippines came. And the liberal left started mocking us. All right, you have somebody from the Philippines. I mean, what does he count? So we tried to get ambassadors from the EU and from the United States. So I went to the Czech ambassador and asked him about what does he feel about the settlements. And he said, the whole world is mad. He told me that. They open Haaretz every day and they act according to what's written in Haaretz. So I said, would you like to come to Ariel? He said, yes. So we invited him to Ariel, and the president and the chancellor and everybody was there. We gave him the red carpet and we showed him Ariel. He was very fascinated. And we asked him, do you mind if we put this in the press? He said no, but with some limitation. So we put it in the press, we sent it to the press. The next day, there was an earthquake in the Middle East. all the Arabs, the Palestinians, said, we are going to the United Nations and we are going to the EU. How come that an ambassador from the EU crosses the green line to the occupied territories? So the Arabs, when something like that, which is trivial, for an ambassador to cross the green line, it's so trivial, but they did not keep quiet. And when we see what's happening in many capitals of the world, we keep silent. The leadership in the United States and in Israel are doing very little to confront boycott Israel. Now, what is boycott Israel? Boycott Israel is anti-Semitism. It's what Herzl at the time thought, that once we build a Jewish state, then there will be no anti-Semitism. They will say that the Jews are not parasites of the Gentiles. But this was wrong. This proved wrong. Anti-Semitism is built in many of these people, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in other places. So what is happening is that this discredit of Israel and the Jewish people is something that is like a threshold to something much worse that is coming. Iran says we are going to wipe Israel out of the map. You don't see anybody getting excited about it. A member of the United Nations, nobody's getting excited about it. Only 70 years ago, Jews were exterminated in Germany, and yet he says, I'm going to throw an atom bomb on Israel and wipe out another 6 million Jews. So who cares? And we are doing very little. In fact, we are doing nothing. You know, I was heading a parliamentary delegation in Germany some years ago. And I met with the Israeli ambassador there. And I asked him, why is the Hasbara, or public diplomacy, of Israel so weak? And he said, do you know what the budget of the Hasbara is of Israel? I said, no. He said, $10 million. $10 million a year is less than what the company spends on PR. I asked him, how much of the 10 million goes on salaries? And he said 6 million. So we're left with 4 million. That was 10 years ago. Last year, I met the general consul in New York, Ido Haroni, and I asked him, I said, look, I spoke with the Ambassador Stein in Berlin 10 years ago, and he said, it's 10 million. He said, it's not anymore 10 million. I said, how much is it? He said, 8 million. And how much goes on salaries? He said, 6 million. So if Israel spends on Hasbara 2 million, that's what we get. We get no Hasbara, and there is nothing to refute the lies of the Arabs. Today I went on air, on television, with the son of an Israeli general, Miko Peled. I don't know whether anybody heard of Miko Peled. He says, who says that the Jews of today are the descendants of King David? Why do they think that Israel belongs to them? Or Palestine, rather. Why do they think that Palestine belongs to them? It belongs to the Palestinians because the Palestinians were born there. They were there since time immemorial. This is a Jew, a son of a general, who uses his father's name to discredit Israel. Nobody says anything. And when I tried it, today I said, what you're talking is rubbish and unsubstantiated. And when he said Israel is an apartheid, this is a joke, but Jews are saying that Israel is an apartheid, and nobody really knows what really apartheid is. But if Israel is an apartheid, then the Arabs are double apartheid, because there's no Jew living there. And if a Jew gets in an Arab country, he gets lynched, whether it's in the Palestinian Authority or other places. But I don't want to, I'm a lawyer myself, I don't want to waste time on legal matters, but I want to give you some glimpse how the whole world can be wrong, and yet nobody shows them that they are wrong. Now we go back, I'm not talking about the Bible and the Promised Land. This is very, very important. But I want to talk about international law. Because when they say that settlements are illegal, it means they are speaking law. And if they are speaking law, we should answer him by law. Now, if we take the Balfour Declaration, the British conquered the Middle East in 1917. And the British and the French decided to share these territories between a few nations. They decided to give the Arabs Mesopotamia, which then became Iraq, Syria and Lebanon. Palestine was designated to the Jewish people. Now let me tell you that at that time, the Jews were a small minority in Palestine. And yet, the Allied powers, the British and the French, decided to give this area to the Jewish people because of the historical connection of the Jews to the land of Palestine. So let me read to you part of the Balfour Declaration. It says this: His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. I want you to remember the words national home. A national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. What you learn from this is that nationhood is given only to one people, and that's the Jewish people. The Arabs were not forgotten. The minorities, or not the minorities, the non-Jewish people were not forgotten. It says they will be given civil and religious rights, and that only. So when the Arabs say, where are we? Why don't you give us part of Palestine? It's our country. No, it's not. It's not. We can tell them it's not their country, because the area was designated to the Jewish people alone. Now, after that, this document is not an international document. It's a document stated by the British government to the Jewish people through Mr. Rothschild, Lord Rothschild. But the documents that came after that are international instruments, binding international instruments. After this comes the San Remo in 1920, which reaffirmed the fact that Palestine goes to the Jewish people and to them alone. Now let me explain that Palestine in 1920 was two sides of the Jordan River, not just the western part. but the whole part was Palestine. That's what's called Palestine. When it says here Palestine, doesn't mean part of Palestine. After San Remo came the British Mandate instrument. And the British Mandate instrument is a very important instrument. The League of Nations, 51 nations in the League of Nations, voted for establishing a Jewish nationhood, a nationhood for the Jewish people in Palestine. That makes it international. That makes it international law. It's an agreement, it's a decision taken by the League of Nations. And the League of Nations decided to give to the British government the mandate over Palestine for one reason only: to establish a Jewish state in Palestine. Now, to do that, they had to open the doors to Jews from all over the world to come and settle in Palestine. And to do that, they had to accept or to allow Jewish people to buy land in Palestine. And to do that, they had to give citizenship to Jews to come to Palestine. None of this was done by the British government. It was, in fact, a full abrogation of the mandate instrument. I want to read you a small excerpt from the British Mandate, which says, the Council of the League of Nations, the Council of the League of Nations said that the principal Allied powers have agreed that the mandatory should be responsible for putting into effect the declaration originally made on November 2nd, 1917 by the government of His Britannic Majesty and adopted by the said powers in favor of the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Now, this is an international document. Have you ever heard any leader, Jewish leader, anywhere in the world who spoke about this? Who said that this area was promised in international law to the Jewish people? None. Then it says, it being clearly understood that nothing should be done which might prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. The difference between the mandate and the Balfour Declaration is that the Balfour Declaration was a bit hesitant. The Balfour Declaration said that the Massachusetts government will view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home, and it will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement. No more. You don't find this in the mandate. In the mandate, it says clearly that this area is designated to the Jewish people and to the Malay. Now, why don't we say that? Why are we losing our arguments, our main arguments? You know what it's like? The wars of today are not similar than the wars of yesterday. Today you have a battlefield. There is a battlefield. But most of the war is on the diplomatic and political arena. The Israelis win the wars on the battlefield, but they lose the battle in the diplomatic and political arena. Each time. Because we go to war in the political arena with pistols, while we have tanks and war planes and sophisticated weapons. We go out with pistols. And we speak about security. The American pressure on Israel is about security. Israel and the Jewish people are not stating that this land is Jewish land and that Arabs have no nationalhood in that area. Now let me quote another article in the British Mandate. The mandatory, that's Article 5, shall be responsible for seeing that no Palestine territory shall be ceded or leased to or in any way placed under the control of the government of any foreign power. I want you to remember this article when I tell you that the British government tore Transjordan from Palestine and gave it to the Hashemite kingdom, the Hashemite family of Saudi Arabia, and brought in a Prince Abdullah and made him a king in Transjordan. Now, Transjordan is 78% of the Palestine territory. So if we take Palestine in 1922, two sides of the Jordan, and we take Palestine in 1947, only western part of the Jordan. In 1947, there was the partition plan. And Israel was left with 10% of what was promised in the British Mandate. And yet the Jews say yes, and the Arabs said no. Now the Arabs want this land back because they lost 7 wars. And you know what? The whole world says this land is Arab land. This land is Arab land. I'm sorry to say that in this mistake was the International High Court in The Hague, who made that mistake, and also the Supreme Court of Israel. The Supreme Court of Israel began its judgments in 1968, just after the Six-Day War. And at that time, when cases started coming up to the Supreme Court, to the High Court of Justice in Israel, the court did not know what to do with it. It's unthinkable, for example, that if a house was to be demolished in Berlin after the Second World War, that the owner of this house would go to the Supreme Court in Britain and make an allegation. So do they have the right to come to the Supreme Court of Israel or not? But you know, Jews want to be holier than the Pope. And we said, we have nothing to hide. We are doing much better than the Geneva Convention and the Hague Instruments. We are on a much higher value or moral values than what the Geneva Convention is saying, so we don't care to adopt it. But this adoption, every year, suddenly became part of the law of the country. And now the Geneva Convention applies in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria, as if it was occupied territory. But a nation cannot occupy belligerently its own home. I can occupy my home, not belligerently. But the world says you are occupied belligerently, therefore you have to leave the country. And I speak to you as a legal professional. And I tell those people who say, we have to give this land to the Arabs. And I tell them, okay, you want to give the land to the Arabs, but at least say it's yours. Because if you say, I want to give you the land back to you, then you're saying that you're holding it illegally. But you're not holding it illegally, so why say that?
Didn't Begin say that was our land?
Sorry?
Begin said that was our land.
A long time has passed in Begin, unfortunately. A long time has passed since then. And since the Oslo Accords, many things changed in the narrative. And today we are actually adopting the Arab narrative. The Arab narrative. We speak about peace, but we don't mean peace. We speak about Palestinians, but there is no Palestinians. There is no nation as a Palestinians. You know that Golda Meir was a Palestinian. I have many friends who were born in Palestine, and they have a birth certificate which shows that they are Palestinians. And they're Jews, they're Israelis. There's no Palestinian people. We made a Palestinian people. Let me remind everyone that Israel was the only country in the world who offered the Palestinians a state. And when they say we occupied those territories, the question is, from whom did we occupy them? From Jordan, who invaded the western part of Palestine with no legal basis? Or is it Egypt, who did not claim any sovereignty over Gaza? Did we occupy it from them? Palestine was never a state. Who is saying that? No one. No one. We're speaking only about security. And there's one other thing that I want to mention. We're speaking about a peace process. How do you know if somebody wants to make peace with you? He was your enemy of yesterday. For example, Germany made peace with France after the Second World War. How do we know that they really mean peace? There's one very important exam that one can have to see whether his enemy has decided to give up going to war with the other side. And that's how they educate their children. If you tell your children that the highest thing that they can achieve in life is to kill Jews, that doesn't mean that you mean peace. And this is it's self-evident, because all schools, all books speak about killing Jews, and that the Jews are pigs, and that the Jews are the same, they have the same things that the Germans used to apply to the Jews. Exactly the same way. The same cartoons, the same pictures with the ugly nose and the big ears and so forth. Secondly, whom are we trying to make peace with? You know, today, Mahmoud Abbas hardly represents the Fatah. He doesn't represent the Hezbollah, he doesn't represent the Hamas, and he doesn't represent the Jihad, and he hardly represents his own people. He was elected as a president for 4 years, and now he's already 11 years, and I don't know whether he has any legal standing to represent anybody. So we have in Israel, and in the diaspora, in the United States, and in Europe, people who say we have to carry on with the peace process. With whom? What sort of process? What sort of peace process we're talking about? Because what the Arabs want for this process is everything. They want Jerusalem, they want 1967 borders, they want us to throw out 500,000 Jews from the Judea and Samaria. For what? And yet, you have still among us people who say, yes, we have to continue the peace process. The peace process is an Arab narrative, because this is not a process to go to peace. But we are using these words. If you say, we are having a process to erect a Palestinian state that will fight Israel for the next 100 years. Nobody will accept that. But if you say it's a peace process, but this is exactly the outcome of what we are doing. Then there's something else. You know that Ehud Barak, our prime minister, wanted to give Arafat everything till the last point of the 1967 borderlines. He was prepared to give him East Jerusalem. He was prepared to give him all the territories that Israel conquered in the 1967 wars in Palestine? Arafat said no. Okay, what do you want? He said, I want the refugees to go to Tel Aviv, to Jaffa, and to Acre, and to Israel. And he said, well, we're giving you a state. Why do you need your people to go to my state? Now, isn't this obvious? It's demography. He was thinking on the lines that if we agree to have 500,000 Arabs going into Israel, the whole demography is going to change. So we're going to have 4 Palestinian states. 4. One is in Jordan. One is in Gaza. The West Bank is Palestinian. And now we want Israel. That's the next step. By demography. And let me tell you one more thing. That in Israel we have people working 24 hours a day. Jews and Arabs. And other radicals from Western countries. To bring an end to the Jewish state. From within. By peaceful means, of course. By the right to speak. The freedom of speech. And they say, we want a country that is open to all its people. Not only to the Jews. Why don't we have the law of return for the Arabs as well? We're talking about equality. This is what we want to do. What we are doing in the Center for Law and Mass Media in Ariel University, which I would say maybe it's the only or one of the very few Zionist universities on earth. What we are trying to do is change the narrative and awaken the Jewish leaders and decision makers to the fact that we are in a very dangerous time. And the delegitimization of the Jewish state is only one step before annihilation. Because if you want to annihilate a people or a state, first of all, you've got to show that it's immoral. And it's illegal. And everything it does is illegal. And we listen to that and we do nothing. We do not react. We have no hasbara. And I suggested to Lieberman 4 years ago, when he was still foreign minister at that time, and I suggested that Israel, of a budget of $100 billion a year, would spend $3 billion on hasbara. And he said, 3 billion is a very hard sum. I said, start with 100 million. He said, yes, you're right. But since then, 4 years passed. Maybe 3.5 years or 4 years passed. And nothing has changed. So we are dormant. We are in a situation where we don't know what the future entails. We have in the Center for Law and Mass Media, we have courses that are called public diplomacy. And the idea of public diplomacy is to give tools to many of our students who may go further to higher education, or may be teachers, or may join the Foreign Office and the IDF, and give them the tools to combat allegations which have no basis at all. If we don't do that, and we don't wake up, then it might be too late. Today, the negotiations, if they succeed, Israel would make a great deal of concessions to the Arabs with getting nothing. I'm sure you know that we have freed murderers from our prisons, which has a fantastic effect. It's not just we released 100 killers or murderers. It's the fact that terrorists know that in Israel, life imprisonment means nothing. Means nothing. Therefore, they can continue to kill because somebody is going to take them out. So the situation is that Israel and the Jewish leaders, Jewish people all over the world, particularly in the United States, have to take those precautions and perhaps know more about the legal aspects. Because when Kerry was in Israel, he was interviewed by a journalist, a top journalist. And Kerry said that the settlements are illegal. I wanted to ask him one question. One word. Why? Why are they illegal? He would have said nothing. He doesn't know why they are illegal. It's illegal, period. If we don't change this narrative, then the situation would be very dangerous. Well, I thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, I'll be delighted to answer. Yes, please.